Phylox's drone extended a laser caliper reflexively, then retracted it. Measuring imperfection felt suddenly obscene. His species had 17 words for geometric regularity. None applied here. The lab's emergency ventilation clicked on, filtering an odor the system flagged as excess mammalian perspiration. Indy ignored it. She dug in her pocket and tossed a data chip onto the nearest workstation. The spider plant's longest tendril lashed toward it midair, wrapping the metal 3 times before anyone could react. Your simulations fail because they assume plants want efficiency. Indy nudged the chip with one finger. The vine tightened, like a fist. They don't. They want survival. Sometimes that means twisted stems. Sometimes that means growing roots through broken concrete. Research from Earth's abandoned biocognition projects confirmed a radical idea. Flora demonstrate problem-solving behaviors when freed from Aristotelian taxonomy. Vines navigate mazes slower than rodents but with perfect recall. Roots exhibit swarm intelligence when locating water. None of this appears in photosynthesis equations because it happens in the cracks between molecular interactions. Gossamer pinged the spider plant with a tentative frequency sweep. The vine gripping the chip pulsed in sync, matching her resonance to 6 decimal places, a feat her doctoral thesis claimed required quantum coherence algorithms. The plant had no neural tissue, no synapses, just cellulose and desperation. Indy crouched beside the pot. Her thumbnail scraped a line of web-thin fibers from the soil surface. Mycorrhizal network, fungal wires that link root systems. They trade nitrogen for sugar, bargain in chemical sentences. She flicked the strands toward Phylox's workstation. They stuck to his pristine holographic interface like hair on soap. The Rigelian student's exoskeleton plates spasmed. His culture worshipped mineral purity. Filaments of organic matter quivering against his projection field triggered deep cast revulsion. Yet when he tried to brush them off, the fibers clung with tensile strength that mocked his species' famed metallurgy. Hugh's vocal modulator emitted a burst of static. "You're suggesting we model biology as commerce? I'm suggesting you stop modeling." Indy plucked a withered leaf from the spider plant's base. The tear sounded like a hung-up call. She laid it on the board and traced its outline with red marker, every brown spot, every chewed edge. The result resembled a mutant archipelago. This survived 8 of Phylox's gravity fluctuations. Record the scars, not the shape. The lab's climate control faltered. Humidity spiked 3% beyond optimal. No one adjusted it. The spider plant's remaining leaves pivoted toward the red outline like satellites locking on a distress beacon. 4 light-years away, the Cerulean Institute of Xenobotany had published a controversial paper on vegetative semiotics, the EE theory that flora communicate via structural changes. Peer reviewers dismissed it for lacking mechanistic explanations. Watching the spider plant echo Indy's markings, Phylox's drones recorded tremors in its cell walls that matched stress, patterns from the withered leaf. Not communication. Consequence. Gossamer's crystalline form shivered into a new harmonic mode. The notes vibrated the petri dishes into a spontaneous glass choir. She was recomposing her entire thesis in real time, shifting from frequency precision to residual resonance. Indy didn't smile. She uncapped a blue marker and drew a single zigzag across the board. Lightning. Before the holograms could correct her primitive rendering, she grabbed an Erlenmeyer flask and upended it over the spider plant's pot. Water sloshed onto soil, desk, and 3 cephalopod field notes. The plant's reaction made Gossamer's harmonics crack mid-scale. Every tendril stiffened. Roots audibly shifted in damp earth. Then, with glacial patience, the tip of the longest vine extended toward the lightning sketch. Not directly, not efficiently. In a slow, meandering spiral that avoided the driest part of the board entirely. Later analyses would confirm the vine's path matched water diffusion patterns from 17 days prior, when a cleaning drone had malfunctioned nearby. The plant remembered, not computationally, not even chemically, Somewhere in the flex of cell walls and the tension of xylem tubes, it had mapped this exact stretch of laminate before. Philox's drones spontaneously rebooted. His cranial implants displayed the spinning helix icon that signaled catastrophic paradigm collapse. Gossamer's resonance fields flatlined into something suspiciously like awe. Indy wiped her hands on her trousers, leaving twin streaks of soil and ink. Your black holes happen because you keep deleting the mistakes. She gestured at the spider plant, now coiled contentedly around its stolen data chip. Plants archive every storm, every drought, every idiot who overwatered them. That's the system you're trying to simulate. Hugh's carapace plates clacked like a failing engine. The sound signaled the rarest event in Helios Prime's academic history, a professor requesting student permission. "Show us," his vocal modulator rasped. The marker squeaked one final time. Not a circle, not a vein. A rough approximation of the Burr puzzle gathering dust on the lab's demonstration shelf, the one no student had ever solved without quantum modeling software. The spider plant's leaves rustled in dry amusement. Indy reached for the puzzle with both hands. The lab's Burr puzzle had sat on its display pedestal for 8 semesters, an ornamental relic from when Helios Prime still believed in hands-on learning. 6 interlocking hardwood pieces arranged into a perfect sphere. The brass plaque beneath it listed 16 renowned xenomathematicians who'd failed to solve it without assistance. Philox's first act upon joining the lab had been to scan it with subatomic precision. His holograms could render each wood grain in perfect 4D projection. When he attempted the puzzle 6 weeks prior, his drones had manipulated the pieces via laser-guided tractor beams. Molecular friction coefficients calculated to 9 decimal places. Torque vectors adjusted for humidity-induced expansion. The hardwood should have slid apart like magnetic bearings. Instead, 3 pieces jammed permanently. Maintenance drones later found sawdust in the tractor emitters. Now Indy picked it up with bare hands. The wood made a dry clack against her fingernails. Philox's cranial implants flickered with involuntary dismissal protocols. No gloves, no sensors, not even basic sanitation fields. Just human keratin and sweat interacting with material older than her species' written history. His drones recorded the exact angle of her thumbs pressing against grain lines, data that later proved useless. Burr puzzles derive from ancient human woodworking traditions where tolerances were measured in finger widths, not nanometers. The craftsman compensated for imprecision by leaving intentional whisper gaps, microscopic spaces where compression could redistribute. Modern replicas milled by precision robots lack this adaptive give. They either fit perfectly or not at all. Indy's fingers moved with the unhurried certainty of someone turning soil. She didn't twist or force. Her thumbs found depressions, worn smooth by centuries of failed attempts. The leftmost piece tilted 3 degrees clockwise, not enough to trigger Philox's motion sensors, but enough to make Gossamer's crystalline form emit a subsonic ping. Haptic intelligence studies confirm the human palm contains more neural pathways than some species' entire brains. Fingertips discern textures down to 13 nanometer variations. But Indy wasn't just feeling surface detail. Her palms registered the puzzle's memory, where generations of frustrated solvers had compressed certain grain lines, which joints bore faint sweat residue from habitual pressure points. The 4th piece stuck. Philox's drone zoomed in, expecting her to replicate his calculated vibration sequence. Instead, she exhaled warm breath across the seam. The wood expanded, not evenly, not predictably, just enough. Gossamer's acoustic scans revealed why brute force always failed. The puzzle's core contained a void where termites had chewed through 2 centuries prior. The irregular cavity created stress patterns no equation could model. Attempting perfect alignment guaranteed jamming. Success required imitating the original craftsman's adaptive imprecision. Indy rotated the stubborn piece counterclockwise, now pressing not at the marked stress points but beside them. The motion looked less like problem-solving and more like testing ripeness. The wood creaked, a sound absent from Philox's holographic attempts. and suddenly the sphere lay in 2 hemispheres across her palms. The plaque's failure counter ticked over to 17. Yet no reaction trumped the spider plants. On Indy's desk, its tendrils uncurled toward Who with unsettling intent. Biological organisms, it seems, recognize defeat faster than quantum processors. The room's collapse wasn't merely professional. It was existential. Each student's personal myth, the Rigelian prodigy, the silicate virtuoso, the cephalopod polymaths, depended on problems yielding to superior cognition. Now their equations amounted to floral euthanasia techniques. A lesser institution might have clung to denial, but Helios Prime's academic culture prided itself on facing uncomfortable truths, provided they were presented with sufficient citations. So when Who's carapace plates clicked with exhaustion, no one dared protest. The synthesized resignation hit their collective certainty like a solar flare hitting unshielded circuitry. Archaeological records from Earth's scientific dark ages suggest this precise dynamic powered every paradigm shift. Copernicus, Darwin, and the team that discovered quantum tunneling all shared one experience: the dizzying second when arrogance gives way to curiosity. That transition smells like ozone and adrenaline. That transition sounds like Hugh's vocal modulator glitching on the word unsolved. Felix broke first. His drones retracted their manipulator arms in a gesture eerily reminiscent of human palms turning upward. The display marked the first voluntary display of uncertainty in his species' recorded history. Gossamer followed, her resonance fields dropping to wavelengths that no longer made the lab's glassware vibrate. They didn't look at each other. They didn't need to. The unspoken realization passed between them like a current. They'd been hacking at water with scalpels and calling it progress. Then a chair leg shrieked against ferrocrete. Indy stood with the stiffness of someone unaccustomed to interrupting. The spider plant lurched after her, roots straining against potting mesh. Her notebook lay open to a sketch of Who's hologram, crisscrossed with penciled vines that grew through the equations rather than solving them. Her first movement in 6 months wasn't toward the holographic workspace. It was toward the whiteboard, where Felix had once written a treatise in vanishing quantum ink. The markers there hadn't been touched in semesters, their caps sealed with the crisp finality of museum displays. The silence acquired weight. The cephalopod's gill slits flared. Felix's drones hovered like nervous hummingbirds. Then the squeak of a dry erase marker. Not the precise click of a hologram stylus engaging. The cruder, wetter sound of pigment forced onto polymer. Indy drew a circle. Not a geometric construct rendered by algorithms. Not a platonic ideal. A lopsided, freehand oval that wobbled where her wrist turned. The spider plant's leaves twitched in sympathy. The circle contradicted everything about the lab. Its asymmetry offended Felix's dimensional matrices. Its handmade imprecision violated Gossamer's frequency-perfect harmonics. And yet, it looked exactly like a plant bending toward light. The marker squeaked. 3 cephalopod students inked themselves. Indy hadn't touched a hologram in 6 months. Yet here she was, dragging pigment across polymer like some pre-FTL primate discovering cave walls. The whiteboard's surface resisted her stroke. Too smooth, too perfect. Just like everything else in Helios Prime's lab. Felix's cranial implants flickered. The circle wasn't just asymmetrical. It violated 3 foundational principles of computational botany: precision, repeatability, and mathematical elegance. If a plant grew that unevenly, his algorithms would classify it as defective. Gossamer's resonance fields emitted a dissonant chime, the silicate equivalent of a scoff. But the lopsided oval didn't care about their disapproval. It bulged slightly, leftward where Indy's wrist had turned. The bottom edge smudged where she'd pressed too hard. A child could have drawn it, assuming the child wasn't raised on a planet where children learned vector calculus before finger painting. Embodied cognition research suggests a peculiar truth. Sometimes the body knows things the brain can't. Articulate. A baker's hands understand dough elasticity before she can explain it. A potter's fingers sense ceramic weaknesses invisible to sensors. Indy's circle carried that same unteachable certainty, the kind that thrives in muscle, memory, not memory chips. The cephalopod's chromatophores cycled through confusion patterns. One tentacle absently traced the air, mimicking the marker's path. Their species hadn't used manual writing tools since discovering neural interfaces. The motion looked almost painful, like watching someone relearn breathing. Phylox's drones zoomed in on the aberration, scanning for hidden fractals or quantum variables. They found only dried ink and microscopic board texture. Gossamer pinged the circle with a resonance scan, expecting harmonic subpatterns. The board vibrated slightly under the frequency, making the marker lines ripple. For a second, the imperfect oval seemed to breathe. Then Indy tapped the spider plant's pot. The sound, clay on laminate, echoed louder than Gossamer's acoustic arrays ever had. The plant's longest tendril uncurled toward the board with unsettling purpose. It didn't care about the circle's mathematical flaws. It recognized something else entirely. Comparative xenobotany studies confirm a universal, constant. Flora don't grow in straight lines. Roots meander around rocks. Vines spiral, searching for support. Leaves twist to maximize light exposure while minimizing wind resistance. A perfect circle occurs exactly nowhere in nature. Indy's wobbling oval, though, that looked exactly like a time-lapse of morning glory tendrils groping for a trellis. The lab's emergency protocols activated briefly when the Rigelian exchange student's blood pressure spiked. His exoskeleton plates flexed with audible cracks. "This violates procedure," his vocal modulator announced. Apropos of nothing, Indy wiped the circle away with her sleeve, an act of heresy in a temple of preserved calculations. The spider plant recoiled, then relaxed when she redrew it slightly higher. This version leaned right instead of left. The plant's leaves swayed in sync, as if the marker tugged on invisible strings. Phylox's drones deployed laser calipers without prompting. They measured the new circle's imperfections to 0.001 millimeters, cataloging every deviation from geometric perfection. The readout scrolled across his hologram. A symphony of errors, a catalog of failures. Yet when Indy stepped aside, the spider plant reached for the board like it was sunlight. Later, scholars would debate whether what followed qualified as epiphany or humiliation. At the time, it just smelled like potting soil and electrostatic discharge. Indy crouched beside the plant stand. Her fingers, uncharacteristically steady now, plucked a single leaf. The tear made a sound like Velcro separating. Every student leaned forward, sensors primed for some grand reveal. She stuck the leaf to the lopsided circle, not centered, not aligned, just slightly left of the bulge, where a real plant might grow its first offshoot. The adhesive was saliva. The science was impeccable. The spider plant's remaining leaves snapped toward the board with enough force to sway its pot. A thin vine crept across the desk, testing the air like a blindworm sniffing prey. The leaf on the board didn't move. It didn't need to. Indy glanced at Gossamer's frozen resonance fields, at Phylox's stalled drones, at Who's dimmed carapace. Then she uncapped a green marker, the kind no one used because holograms rendered colors with perfect spectral accuracy. This green was muddy, slightly off-band, remarkably leaf-like. She drew a stem from the circle to the leaf. Not a clean line. Not a vector. A stem. It thickened near the base, swayed slightly, even had a microscopic kink where she'd paused to breathe. The spider plant shivered. Gossamer's acoustic dampeners failed completely. The sound that escaped her crystalline structure wasn't language, wasn't music, just raw, untuned vibration. It cracked 2 specimen slides. Hugh's vocal modulator produced static. When it resolved, the synthesized voice carried something no algorithm could fake. Wonder. "You're not solving for growth patterns," he said. "You're letting the plant solve itself." Indy capped the marker. The click echoed through 12 species worth of shattered assumptions. Across the room, the lab's other plants, ignored for semesters as mere test subjects, turned their leaves toward the board. None of them cared about dimensional harmonics or quantum matrices. They just recognized kin. Indy tapped the marker against the whiteboard like a judge calling order. The sound made Philox's drones twitch. "Plants don't calculate photosynthesis," she said. The spider plant's leaves curled toward her voice. Silence pooled thicker than the nitrogen gel in the specimen cabinets. 16 alien respiratory systems held still. Gossamer's resonance fields flatlined in a way that would have alarmed her acoustics professor. The claim wasn't controversial. It was preposterous. Photosynthesis involved precise quantum-level electron transfers, pigment, molecule excitations, ATP synthase rotations. Every known model treated it as nature's most elegant optimization problem. Indy wiped her lopsided circle off the board with one sleeve. The spider plant shivered when its sketched counterpart vanished. Then she drew two parallel lines. No ruler, just freehand streaks that wavered like creek beds seen from orbit. "This is a vascular bundle." The marker squeaked emphasis. "Not a nutrient transport conduit, not fluid dynamic superhighway. A vein." Philox's drones emitted the high-frequency whine of processors overheating. His culture had no concept of cheating by feel. Either a solution followed calculable steps, or it didn't count. Yet there the puzzle sat, divided not by superior intellect but by surrender to material whims. Indy ran a thumb along the exposed interfaces. "Maple," she said, "cut in late winter. See how the grain bunches here?" Her fingernail traced patterns resembling terrestrial weather fronts. Sap was still down. Carpenter knew it'd cure harder. The observation shouldn't have mattered. The puzzle's material properties had been exhaustively documented. Yet no prior solver, not even the Andromedan tactile savant, had noticed the tree's growth history encoded in those annular rings. Because noticing required treating wood as narrative, not data. Gossamer pulsed a chromatic scale that made the disassembled pieces vibrate. The sound revealed microfractures radiating from the termite damage, invisible faults that redistributed stress unpredictably. Her earlier scans had filtered these imperfections as noise. Now she reconfigured her sensors to track fractures, like musical phrases. Human tradespeople call this reading the material. Blacksmiths learned to strike when iron asked. Carpenters planned boards where they wanted to split. Indy hadn't solved the puzzle. She'd conversed with it. Hughes. Vocal modulator emitted a burst of static that his translator rendered as inadmissible methodology. Academic decorum required solutions to be replicable, documentable, free from subjective interpretation. Yet here stood a first-year student holding proof that centuries of institutional prowess had been defeated by a thumbnail's sensitivity to tree rings. The spider plant chose this moment to unfurl a new tendril toward the puzzle's remains. Its progress along the desk took 7 minutes, leisurely by human standards, lightning fast for chlorophytum comosum. When it reached the separated pieces, the vine coiled possessively around a segment chewed smooth by termites. The plant recognized. Philox's drones finally exhausted their power cells trying to reconcile the scene. They landed gracelessly atop the specimen cabinets, lenses still focused on the puzzle's innards. Their last transmission showed something no algorithm could parse, the way Indy's fingertips lingered on the wood's history before reassembling it with deliberate imprecision. Hughes' carapace plates clacked in what xenopsychologists later classified as intellectual vertigo. His vocal modulator cycled through 12 translation modes before settling on a synthetic sigh. Demonstrate. Indy recapped the puzzle in 9 seconds flat, faster than the lab's cleaning drones could manage, but she left one piece deliberately misaligned, creating a hairline gap where the termite damage had been. "Leave it breathing room," she said. Daur. Spider plant's vines relaxed their grip. Across the lab, Gossamer reconfigured her resonance fields into something looser, more improvisational. Even Philox's idle drones adopted a slight oscillation. Less machine precision, more owl riding thermals. When maintenance staff collected the puzzle next morning, they found 16 similar gaps left by students who'd finally grasped the difference between solving and listening. The plaque remained unchanged. Institutional recognition moved slower than vines. 3 days later, The first gardening gloves appeared in the equipment lockers, not the sterile polymer kind used for handling toxic specimens, worn leather ones, thumb seams patched with earthy-smelling adhesives. No one logged their arrival in the inventory. No one needed to. The spider plant claimed a new tendril every 47 hours, slow enough to seem deliberate, fast enough to worry facilities management. Its latest growth stretched toward the freshly misaligned puzzle display, where a single maple sliver now rested permanently askew. Maintenance logs showed 18 subsequent attempts to recenter it. All failed. Not because the piece resisted, because the wood had learned to settle where it pleased. 3 weeks later, the lab smelled like potting soil and compromised principles. Maintenance logs showed 17 requests to remove the unsanctioned organic matter accumulating near workstations. Each ticket closed with the same notation: resident academic authority insists on retaining specimens per new research parameters. Hugh's vocal modulator had developed a new inflection, something between resignation and revelation. He'd stopped wearing his precision calibration harness. The straps now secured a spider plant to his carapace. The shift wasn't elegant. Philox's drone still occasionally fired tractor beams at potted ferns out of muscle memory. Gossamer's resonance. Fields kept defaulting to sterilization frequencies until foliage wilted in protest. But the institutional veneer had cracked. When Helios Prime's Oversight Committee demanded progress reports, Who submitted time-lapse recordings of roots navigating mazes without a single equation. Academic paradigm shifts tend to happen like tree growth, invisible until suddenly undeniable. The spider plant became their reluctant teacher. Students gathered around its pot during breaks, watching how new tendrils explored spaces the old ones had mapped. What began as grudging observation became structured study. Someone labeled its pot specimen alpha in erasable ink. The name stuck. Research on Gestalt learning suggests groups adopt new methodologies fastest when given concrete symbols. The lab symbol currently gripped 4 data chips and a stylus in its roots. Alpha didn't care about their publications or pedigrees. It responded to consistent humidity, finger taps against clay pots, and, apparently, the acoustic patterns of Gossamer's revised harmonics. Every time she hit a particular resonant frequency, the plant extended a new chute toward her workstation. Philox resisted longest. His cranial implants still projected holograms when no one asked, equations scrolling reflexively across any available surface. Until the morning Alpha's longest vine deliberately grew through his projection field. The plant didn't disturb the math. It added annotations, wrinkles where variables ignored material fatigue, subtle thickenings near unstable assumptions. By lunchtime, 3 cephalopod students were taking notes on xylem-based error correction. The methodology spread like mycorrhizal networks. Rigelian botanists started leaving gaps in computational models for organic adjustment factors, silicate. Researchers incorporated imperfect resonance into growth simulations. Even the lab's cleaning drones developed a new protocol. Instead of sterilizing spills immediately, they now scanned for nutrient potential. 15 species of formerly ornamental plants gained sudden research relevance. Hugh's lectures lost their rigid structure. What used to be quantifying photosynthetic efficiency through multispectral analysis became observing how leaves redistribute weight during wind events. Attendance tripled. Students brought specimens from home, mutant varieties, genetically altered cultivars, one particularly belligerent Venus flytrap that kept eating Philox's smallest drones. The syllabus officially listed Alpha as a teaching assistant. Its contributions involved existing stubbornly. Academic revolutions rarely look impressive in real time. The lab's transformation amounted to scattered terracotta pots and an embarrassing number of spilled water trays. Published papers still required proper citations and controlled vocabulary. But the citations now included phrases like personal observation noted by specimen alpha during diurnal cycle 742. Peer reviewers across 12 systems developed stress-induced pigmentation changes. Alpha's fame grew faster than its root system. Visiting scholars asked to be introduced to it like visiting dignitaries. The planetary science dean installed a matching pot in her office, though her specimen lacked the original's unsettling knack for pointing out flawed logic. Within months, 3 competing institutions launched their own resident flora advisor programs. The lab's funding committee initially protested the reallocation of quantum processor credits toward horticultural frivolities, until Who played them Alpha's greatest hit, a time-stamped recording of the plant solving a protein folding problem by growing through a hologram in the exact pattern the supercomputers eventually derived after 6 weeks. The vine's path matched the optimal configuration to within 0.003%. Gossamer's breakthrough came when she stopped forcing harmonics and started listening. Her crystalline body could emit perfect frequencies, but the plants responded better to slight imperfections, the acoustic equivalent of Indy's lopsided circles. She composed a symphony where each note trembled precisely 0.4% off-key. Every specimen in the lab leaned toward the sound. Philox's drones learned to nudge rather than dictate. Instead of calculating exact moisture distribution, they identified zones where water might be appreciated. The shift produced 7 papers on probabilistic irrigation systems. His cranial implant still projected compulsively, but the equations now included hand-drawn arrows. Even he couldn't explain. The real tipping point came when the Galactic Society of Xenobotany revoked Hugh's empirically unsound research grants. Alpha responded by weaving his suspension notice into its root structure. The image circulated on academic networks with captions like, "Peer review in action." By the time Hu got reinstated, half his colleagues were fighting to keep their own disciplinary houseplants. Registrars reported a 400% increase in first years declaring botany minors. The surge created a black market for mentor specimens, ordinary plants sold with backstories of improbable insight. A particularly scraggy pothos from Indy's windowsill traded hands for 17 credits and a case of liquid fertilizer. Its new owner promptly failed it in 3 courses for lack of engagement. For all the changes, the lab still looked like a lab. Plants just happened to occupy every flat surface now. Holograms coexisted with hanging vines. Alpha's original pot sat enthroned on a repurposed spectrometer, tendrils draped over the controls like a cat claiming furniture. Indy stopped coming to lectures around mid-semester. The official record listed independent study. Unofficially, she'd been spotted at the orbital hydroponics bay, talking to growers about strain resilience. Her old notebooks remained in the lab archive, their penciled margins now treated as prophetic texts. During final assessments, Hu administered no written exams. Students presented their assigned plants and explained what they'd learned from observing them. Philox nearly failed until Alpha extended a vine toward his drone during the evaluation. The appendage traced a perfect sigma function in midair, before curling into a shape resembling a question mark. The Oversight Committee grudgingly approved continued funding, after specimens from the lab solved 2 previously intractable nutrient distribution models. Their report included 17 caveats about methodology, while acknowledging unprecedented results. On the last day of term, the cleaning drones hesitated before sterilizing a new vine Alpha had grown across the main console. They pinged Hu for instructions. His vocal modulator emitted static for 3 full seconds before resolving into what might have been a laugh. "Leave it," he said. The vine eventually worked its way into the coolant vents, where it thrived on recycled condensation. 6 months later, the entire system ran 4 degrees cooler. No one could explain why until a first year pointed out the tendrils had grown in fractal patterns matching optimal heat dispersion models. By then, Alpha occupied 7% of the lab's floor space. Registration for next semester's courses hit record numbers. Some applicants even belonged to carbon-based species. The universe's best teacher never said a word. It just kept growing toward the light. The universe's best teacher turned out to be a 5-credit spider plant from the orbital fertilizer district. While supercomputers imploded under their own elegance, Alpha just kept unfurling leaves toward whatever worked. Brilliance isn't always about stacking another dimension onto your equations. Sometimes it's about noticing your pencil makes better curves when you exhale halfway through. The lab's revolution didn't start with a breakthrough. It started with a student who trusted smudges over simulations. Next time you're stuck, try this. Power down the holograms. Pick up something that remembers being a tree. Draw the problem badly. Listen for the places the paper pushes back. Alphas. Grading your work now. Good news, it gives extra credit for crooked lines. The classroom hummed with 6 galaxies worth of computational brilliance, quantum matrices, dimensional harmonics, every tool imaginable. And yet, the synthesis paradox remained unsolved for 30 years. Then the quiet human in the back picked up a marker. Her first words in 6 months weren't equations. They weren't even theories. Just a lopsided circle drawn freehand. What happened next rewrote galactic science forever. Helios Prime's xenobiology lab crackled with the kind of energy usually reserved for black market tech auctions or high-stakes AI poker tournaments. Holograms flickered with equations scrolling too fast for most species to parse. Alien students muttered in 12 languages, their appendages twitching over input pads with the nervous intensity of gamblers doubling down on bad bets. The air smelled like ozone and fraying patience. Professor Hughes' synthesis paradox had lasted 3 decades. 30 years of quantum matrices folding in on themselves, dimensional harmonics collapsing into nonsense, and at least 4 separate attempts to brute force the solution through recursive neural networks. The problem resisted computation like water resisting a knife. Every semester, new geniuses arrived with fresh arrogance. Every semester, they left with migraines. Take Phylox from Rigel 7. His approach involved rewriting organic processes as 12-dimensional tensor equations. The calculations spanned 7 holographic panes and required 3 assistant drones to hold the variables in memory. When he hit execute, the simulation produced a perfect theoretical plant that immediately collapsed into a black hole. The lab's gravity stabilizers still whined when reminded. Then there was Gossamer, a silicate life form who communicated via resonant frequency modulation. Her solution pulsed through the lab's acoustic dampeners in cascading chromatic scales. The plants in the specimen trays nearest her workstation permanently leaned 30 degrees westward, as if trying to escape. Both attempts shared the same critical flaw. They treated biology like an engineering schematic. Research from 12 different interstellar institutes suggested why brute force kept failing. Organic systems don't optimize, they compromise. A plant doesn't calculate the perfect angle for a leaf. It grows toward sunlight while compensating for wind, nutrient distribution, and whatever idiot xenobiologist just bumped its pot. Reduce that to equations, and you lose the adaptability, baked into millions of years of messy survival. The lab's brightest minds missed this because they were too busy measuring the forest to notice the trees. Their sensors could track individual chloroplasts, but couldn't parse why a vine twined left instead of right. Every workstation hummed with processing power. Every student boasted at least one academic award famous enough to double as a doorstop. And all of them stared at the same unsolved problem, like it was personally mocking them. Meanwhile, in the back row, a human girl named Indy Frost took notes on paper. While the lab thrummed with docking procedures for a fresh shipment of quantum processors, she sharpened a pencil. While Philox's latest simulation ate another drone, she sketched something in the margin of her notebook. The contrast wasn't lost on the other students. Their holograms flickered with disdain whenever her pencil scratched too loud. The irony would have been delicious if anyone had paused to taste it. A room full of beings who could mentally solve. Differential equations got stumped by a problem their own lab's potted ferns navigated daily. The plants didn't need 10 dimensions to photosynthesize. They just reached for the light. And that's when Professor Hu said the words that changed everything. The lab's hollow projectors cast diagrams mid-air with millimetric precision, but Indy Frost preferred the smudge of graphite on pulp, while her classmates manipulated variables with neural impulses. She pressed a pencil so hard into her notebook that the paper dimpled. The scratching sound cut through the hum of quantum processors like a woodpecker in a server farm. Other students had translucent cranial implants that projected directly onto their retinas. Indy's only augmentation were calluses on her middle finger. When Gossamer asked, via a sarcastic harmonic chime, why she refused modern tools, Indy just held up a page. The sketches showed plant tendrils coiling around Who's equations, roots cracking through holograms. Not an answer. More of a question none of them had thought to ask. Studies on organic cognition suggest handwriting engages the motor cortex differently than typing. The sluggish drag of ink forces the brain to process ideas rather than transcribe them. Indy's notebooks brimmed with half-erased thoughts, arrows linking margins to doodles, coffee rings highlighting key passages. Meanwhile, Philox's pristine. Holograms preserved every dead-end calculation in uneditable crystal. She watched the others like a botanist observing invasive species. When Gossamer's frequency modulations made a fern retract, Indy didn't gasp or correct. She noted the reaction in cursive with 3 question marks. When Philox's 7th black hole incident warped the lab's gravity field, she anchored her papers under a Petri dish and kept sketching. Her quiet telegraphed something worse than contempt. Patience. The notebooks accumulated under her seat, in leaning towers. Tucked between lecture notes were observations about the alien students' blind spots. Philox ignoring humidity variables, Gossamer dismissing brown leaf edges as aesthetic noise. Indy circled their mistakes without comment, as if compiling evidence for a trial no one knew was happening. The verdict crystallized in margins. They're solving for a universe that doesn't bend. It took 18 weeks before someone noticed her notes weren't just notes. A Rigelian exchange student peeked over during a simulation collapse and saw Indy's page. Instead of equations, she'd drawn the lab's spider plant reaching through the hologram like a hand through mist. Beneath it, 2 words in block letters. Ask them. Then Professor Hugh's vocal modulator crackled with a sound no algorithm could fix. Exhaustion. The cephalopod's chromatophores flashed panic colors. Philox's drones stalled mid-calculation. Even Gossamer's harmonic shimmer flatlined. Because after 30 years, Who's next words weren't equations or encouragement, just a tired admission sputtering through bad speakers. Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Silence. Pooled like spilled coolant. The sort of quiet where you notice the flicker of emergency lights, the way the potted ferns had started leaning away from the consoles. Then a chair scraped. Indy stood for the first time all semester. The pencil stayed on the desk, but its shadow stretched long across her unsolved notebooks. Across the room, the lab's sole spider plant perked up. Hugh's voice modulator emitted a sound no one had heard before. A synthetic sigh that crackled with static and surrender. A blunt admission that scraped across the lab. Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. For 30 years, he had presided over this seminar with the stoicism of a supercomputer parsing its own failure codes. Now his posture sagged. Against the projector console, his carapace dimming to the matte gray of expired battery casings. The hologram behind him cycled through their collective dead ends. Philox's black hole ferns, Gossamer's wilt-inducing frequencies, a Rigelian doctoral candidate's infamous photosynthesis through applied neutron bombardment. A graveyard of elegantly reasoned failures. Around the room, physiological tells flickered like faulty circuits. The cephalopod students flushed hues of confusion, their chromatophores rippling indigo. Philox's cranial implants stuttered, casting blue halos around his head. Even Gossamer's silicate body emitted a subsonic hum that made the specimen drawers vibrate. Studies of academic crises note a peculiar phenomenon. Breakthroughs often happen shortly after surrender, not the performative kind where researchers declare defeat for grant sympathy, the real kind where the ego stops insisting it's smarter than the problem. That shift had never reached Helios Prime's lab before. Datapads across the room logged the climatic moment in dry metrics, a 10-degree drop in ambient temperature from inactive holograms, a spike in biometric stress markers across 12 species. None recorded the tactile absurdity of Philox compulsively straightening already perfectly aligned styluses, or the way Gossamer's harmonic dampeners flicked on and off like a nervous tick.